Good morning. Today in this video, I'll talk about the China threat to India. Now, this is a subject we have seen very regularly in the Indian media where Congress leader Rahul Gandhi is quoting as having said that he does not agree with the Modi government's assessment of China threat to India. But Mr. Gandhi never explained what was his version of the Chinese threat to India. However, at a recent interaction at Chatham House in London, Mr. Gandhi was asked the same question, that what is the China threat to India? And his response was, he drew an analogy with Ukraine. He says, what is going on in Ukraine? Of course, there's a war going on there. He said, it is because the Russians had been telling the Ukrainians that we do not accept your relationship with America and European Union. And if you do not change that, we will challenge your territorial integrity. Similarly, Mr. Gandhi said that the Chinese have been telling India that, look, we do not like your relationship with America. And he left it at that. And he added that it is because of that, because Chinese don't like our relationship with US. They have amassed so many troops, the PLA troops are there, both in Arunachal Pradesh as well as Ladakh. And he gave this idea. Also, he said that he has spoken with the External Affairs Minister Jaishankar, who found Rahul Gandhi's assessment ludicrous. Actually, what Mr. Gandhi said is spot on. Let me explain. As far as Ukraine is concerned, now we have definitively a statement which needs to be shared. The Ukrainian Defense Minister is on record that the Ukrainian forces today have developed interoperability with NATO. Now, this does not happen overnight, it takes years. And this is precisely what the Russians had been telling the Ukrainian. That eastward expansion of NATO is not acceptable, and certainly not NATO being on Ukrainian territory, which is not part of NATO, and exercising that developing interoperability, something now the defense minister has confessed that they were doing. So it was a red line of existential threat. All major powers, they don't wait for things to happen. They preempt. Despite their decades warning, the Russians warning, once this did not stop, the Russians had to do what they did. This is their understanding of the existential threat. Same thing for China. No Indian has any problems in having good relations with America. In fact, all the governments starting with Rajiv Gandhi, who was the Prime Minister in 1985, he was the first Prime Minister who went and signed the MOU on science and technology with the Americans. All governments, whether all across the spectrum, everybody has wanted very good relations with America. But that is not what Rahul Gandhi was hinting. The problem now is that as a consequence of Galwan killings, which happened on 15th of June 2020, the Modi government was so shocked. First of all, within 4 days, the Prime Minister himself said that nobody is sitting on our territory, nobody has come in our territory. The government took two actions. Number one, just to pacify the Chinese, the PLA, from not doing any further incursions or attacks, which could result in a war. Our External Affairs Minister, Jaishankar, and at that time, his Chinese counterpart, Wang Yi, in Moscow, signed a joint statement for normalization of the border. It was done on the 10th of September 2020, and according to me, it is heavily in favor of the Chinese, but this is a different story. And the other action that the Modi government took was, after having pacified the Chinese with this compromise statement or plan of action, they signed towards the end of the Trump administration the last and the most important, the fourth US military foundation agreement was signed. This is where the problem is. And this is what Rahul Gandhi was hinting. Having signed now all the 4 foundation agreements, one was signed by the Vajpayee government and 3 were signed by the Modi government. Now the Indian military has become a part, and mind you, India is not a military ally of America, India is not even a non-NATO ally. Indian military has become a part of the American Defense Network. The defense network which is controlled from the Indo-Pacific Command. We are part of that. And we have accepted the responsibility of being a net security provider in the Indian Ocean region, which is huge, including combat. Joint patrols are going on after having signed these foundation agreements, 4 agreements, and this is where the problem comes for the Chinese. And this is what Mr. Gandhi was hinting, because Chinese have 2 vulnerabilities in the Indian Ocean region. One, their sea lanes of communications, where their trade, everything worth $4 trillion annually, it flows. It flows from Europe and then goes on to China across the Indian Ocean region. And then they have, running alongside the sea lanes of communication, what is the Maritime Silk Road, which is part of the Belt and Road Initiative, a signature project of Xi Jinping, which is a dynamic project. And what that is meant to do is, it will play a major part in the cooperative security as part of the Belt and Road with the nations which are on board the Belt and Road Initiative. And in South Asia, except for India and Bhutan, everybody is on board. That means we could see in coming time, as part of the cooperative security, because it has been agreed by the nation, the BRI nation, we could have more and more of the military vessels, military assets of PLA coming to that country. So what the Americans have done is, they are now threatening with India as the proxy, as the front face. India will do the dirty fighting. The Americans will support them. Just similar case what's happening in Ukraine. And China is also a major power. Won't the Chinese react like the way the Russians have reacted in Ukraine? And this is precisely what he was trying to explain to Jaishankar. But Jaishankar found the whole thing ridiculous. Now, this is not all. The same thing in a roundabout way was tried by the Chinese Foreign Minister Qin Gang, who was recently, as part of the foreign ministers meet of G20, he was in Delhi and he had a bilateral with our external affairs minister. And this is one of the things he told the external affairs minister worth noting. I'm quoting him. He said that the 2 sides, India and China, should view bilateral relations in context of once in a century changes in the world. This is what he said. But obviously, Jaishankar has his own interpretation of this once in a century change. Please listen in to what he says.
The world is moving towards greater multipolarity through steady and continuous rebalancing, and that especially means a multipolar Asia.
Now, what the external affairs minister is saying is that the world is moving towards greater multipolarity and multi-Asia. That means there will be a multi-Asia, there will be a multi-Asia is important for a multipolar world. This is what he is saying. And he is suggesting that India and China will be the 2 poles in Asia, in a multipolar Asia. In other words, what he is saying is that we are in a position to compete with the Chinese in the Indian Ocean region. Never mind that it will be done piggybacking on the US military power. A very dangerous game. But the problem is that Jaishankar needs to understand, is it really a multipolar world and a multipolar Asia? Now, to understand that, let me take the viewers back to the Cold War. In the Cold War, as we are aware, there were two superpowers. And then you had other major powers, part of that NATO, part of Warsaw Pact. There was balance of power because of the binary of bipolar world. So, what was different between, let's say, the NATO nations? They were also major powers, they were also poles, and America and Soviet Union. The difference was, what I say, that they were geostrategic powers. The two superpowers were geostrategic powers. In other words, all geostrategic powers are major powers, but all major powers are not geostrategic powers, because geostrategic powers are different. They have the capability, capacity, and the political determination to influence events way beyond their borders. And only the Americans and the Soviets could do that at that time in the Cold War. And then what happened was that once there was dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991, it dissolved the Soviet Union. Then we had a unipolar world. We had a single superpower, America, reigning. That was it. Then in 2008, things changed. There was a global financial crisis which started in America. And it was in this global financial crisis, the Americans realized that the Chinese model of economic growth had resilience. Therefore, in 2009, when the Obama administration came to power, the Secretary of State Hillary Clinton requested Brzezinski to go as an informal emissary of the Secretary of State to China. He went there and he offered the G2 or Group of Two partnership to China. It was offered in 2009, which the Chinese politely declined. After that, in 2013, when Xi Jinping came to power, he became the General Secretary and he met with President Obama for the first time in America. He instead offered to America what is called a new type of major power relationship, which the Americans have not accepted. Now we have to understand what is this, these two. Why we have to understand is that, look, it was accepted at that time by the Americans that yes, economically the Chinese are doing very well and China is a rising power, it will keep rising economically, and they had no problems with that at all at that time. Now, these two systems are very different because we have to see G2 and new type of major power relationship offered by America and China, exactly where these two countries are coming from. We have to see that. Where is America coming from? America has certain traits, characteristics. The first is perhaps hubris. America is the only nation which has been able to destroy and defeat 4 imperial empires: Imperial Japan, Imperial Germany, Nazi Germany, and the Soviet Union. Though of course the Soviet Union dissolves on its own, but the credit goes to the Americans. They could do that. So that is where it came from. That means everything was about military power as far as the Americans are concerned, which is what they call deterrence. Even today, the Americans have something like 750 military bases with 200,000 troops across the globe. So this is their strength. The strength is to exert military power. And the second thing is, in their entire history, America doesn't have an experience of a partnership, of a strategic partnership, because it simply doesn't believe in the give and take. It is simply not there. And we've seen it in our case. with the civil nuclear deal, how the Americans kept changing the goalpost. But this is what they do with everybody, and the Chinese are aware of that. So what they were telling the Chinese is that in the system, the global institution that we have created, you come and join us because now you have become a major economic power. You come and join us, and we both, in other words, you work as a junior partner. Now the Chinese problem was that they were coming from somewhere else. They were coming from a civilization with a wisdom of thousands of years. And their favorite game, as we know, is Weiqi or Go. Unlike what the West plays about power is the chess. Here, Weiqi is very different. Weiqi doesn't have a checkmate. When the two players sit on the Weiqi board, unless you are a discerner, player and an observer, it is very difficult to also know who has won, which side has won. Because what the Weiqi board does is, there is no checkmate in that. You create areas of influence. This is what you do. And this is precisely where the Chinese were coming from. Chinese had no intention of fighting the Americans to their strength, which is military power. But they wanted to further their interests through their strength, which is economics and hence the geoeconomics. That is the route they took through the Belt and Road Initiative, which is a dynamic concept. That is what they did, where they were offering common prosperity to all the nations who are on board the BRI and collective security. Now, in collective security, they are very clear that for them, security is indivisible. It cannot be a zero-sum game. That your security, you gain security at my cost. No. So there is nothing like an absolute security. It has to be relative security. And this is where their worldview has been accepted by the Russians. Russians accept their worldview. But as the two powers, China and America, they had not accepted each other's offer. Because the Americans felt if we accept this offer of a new type of major power relationship, it would mean that we are actually giving on a platter to the Chinese areas of influence, perhaps in Western Pacific or Indian Ocean region or beyond in Africa, which was inimical to them, which was unacceptable. So nothing happened, but there was no war, nothing happening. They were still working together. The problem started when Chinese Huawei 5G started rolling out in the Western capitals, in Canada. That is where the Americans realized that look, the Chinese had taken a lead. All this while that the Americans thought that they are, imitating, they are stealing their technology, imitating it. Now suddenly they found that they have actually innovated things. Now the big worry was that they have taken a lead in 5G, and 5G happens to be the backbone of artificial intelligence. And artificial intelligence will bring in the fourth industrial revolution. That means the prosperity will depend on that. How much you are able to put artificial intelligence into your systems, into your commerce, into your trade. And here was China threatening to leapfrog in artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence, mind you, it is not a technology. It is a technology of technologies. It is like electricity. It will affect everything. Your commerce, trade, well-being, diplomacy, military power, you name it. Artificial intelligence is everywhere. That is where it is coming. So how could the Americans accept this? Because for the Americans, innovation has always been their strength. So the trade war started during the Trump administration in 2017, and the reason was Huawei 5G. That is where it started, because a straight conclusion is America did not have problem with the risen status of China. Their problem was that China had the potential to leapfrog the Americans in artificial intelligence, In the entire artificial intelligence ecosystem, today there are only two countries which can work in the entire ecosystem of artificial intelligence, have deep pockets and have political determination. And they are China and America. So this is the problem that they had. Now, comes in the Biden administration. In their national security strategy and the national defense strategy, which comes out one from the White House and the other from the Pentagon, there was a business which was left of the last century, which was Russia. So Russia was named as the revisionist power. And China figured everywhere in these two documents of the Americans, because they concluded China now is the only country which can compete, which is a peer competitor and has the capability, capacity and the will to reshape the world order. And this was threatening. This was threatening to an America which is a unipolar America, which had still not got used to the idea that the world was no longer unipolar. And what it had to demolish was these two countries, for the simple reason that these two countries were geostrategic players. There are only three countries in the world, America, China, Russia, who are geostrategic players. Which means, I have already explained what this geostrategic means. They are much more than being a major power. So this was the target then of the Biden administration. So as we know, the Ukraine war is still going on, but two big things have already been accomplished by the Americans, by the Biden administration, to weaken Russia and to weaken China. Weaken Russia on the military front, weaken China on the economic front, because that is their strength. So, what are these two big things which have already been accomplished? One, because of this Ukraine war, the Americans have been able to strengthen, expand and globalize NATO. Very big thing. For example, there used to be 40,000 NATO troops in Europe. Now there are 300,000 troops, 3 lakh troops. There is forward presence of NATO troops in Baltic states. Then Finland and Sweden, they want to join the NATO. Then in the NATO summit of 2022 in Madrid, for the first time in the strategic concept which came after a gap of 10 years, China was also named, whereas NATO honestly had nothing to do with China in Asia Pacific. They were meant to be in the European theatre, but now they were coming to, the Americans were trying to club the two theatres, the Atlantic and the Pacific, because of the strategic partnership with no limits between China and Russia, and both being geostrategic players. One being a bigger geostrategic player and one being a lesser geostrategic player, but nevertheless geostrategic players. Now, so in this NATO summit, not only that, at that time itself, that means all this was pre-planned itself, Asian powers, which are the allies, military allies of America, they were invited as the non-NATO members, which is Japan, Australia, South Korea, and New Zealand was also there. They were invited. After that, what the Americans have done is that in the Western Pacific, a lot of changes have come. For example, Japan. Japan now has given up its, that pacifist thinking and constitution. Now they are looking at long-range weapons to buy it from the Americans. That means the self-defense forces of Japan will now be in a different mode altogether, and a US Marine Corps has already been stationed in Japan. South Korea also feels that if there is a war in Taiwan, again all this has been orchestrated by the Americans. It all started with US Speaker Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan. At that time, it was said by the administration that, look, we cannot control the Congress, and if the leader of the Congress wants to go there, we can do nothing. But now we know that it was all, the whole idea was to provoke the Chinese. To provoke the Chinese so that to demolish their concept of peaceful rise. This was the idea of the whole thing. So, even the South Koreans are worried now if there is any war in South China Sea, East China Sea, or in Taiwan, then their interests in the Korean peninsula, they'll get affected. So they are also militarizing now. Then the Philippines, though part of ASEAN, they have also now given 4 new bases. I mean, this is all there. And then, you see, the point I'm making is very simple, that a lot has been accomplished by the Americans. They have globalized NATO now. Now it's a matter of time. In other words, now they have a firm control over Europe. Much firmer control than earlier it was there. In fact, a country like Germany, the German Chancellor, he has said that very soon he will enhance the defense budget to 2% of his GDP. And they are sending their tanks now, Leopards, to Ukraine. And he met up with Biden and he made a statement that yes, I'm all on board the strategy of the Americans. So this is about America's deterrence military power, which is meant to weaken Russia further and to provoke China. Now, this is one accomplishment. Second accomplishment is deglobalization. And how they did that was, there are 3 strands basically of globalization. The first is about technology. Very specific technology has been picked up, which helps in chips. And chip, as we know, are the basic things, they are the processors for artificial intelligence. And any chip which can give you 7 nanometers and less, they are called advanced chips. And they have choke points. For example, Netherlands is the only country which has the lithographic machines which can produce those chips. So the Americans are now busy, after having signed by the President in August 2022 the Chips and Science Act. Basically now at the choke points, they are putting what they call small yard high fence. They are controlling the high-end technology. It should not go to China, because that will support the Chinese artificial intelligence, and they are worried about that. And of course, they are also looking at reshoring and friendly shoring of the entire chip chain from design to fabrication or manufacture. So this is one thing where a very tight control is being held. The second is trade. Now in trade, not much can be done, but whatever can be done, because after all, China is the primary trading partner of 130 countries. So whatever can be done is being done by the Americans to see that how those supply chains, how they can be diverted or they can be changed. And the third thing which is happening is, or will happen very soon, is the splitting of the internet. Because everything is digitized, it's about cyberspace. So that fear of that cyber attacks of the Chinese has been put by the Americans in all their allies and their sole strategic partner India's mind, that look, they will attack your cyberspace, they'll take all your information, your data, everything. Therefore, we will very soon be seeing, as far as the submarine cables are concerned, which carry all this data, something like 90% of the international data comes from the submarine cables. So we'll see 2 types now. We will see one splinter of the internet which is run by the US technology and the other by the Chinese technology. And all this was preempted, that deglobalization was happening, will happen. It was predicted by the World Economic Forum at Davos in 2022, where the theme was not globalization like in 2019, but the theme of the 2022 Davos conference was cooperation in a fragmented world. So the world has got fragmented. That was the thing. Now, when you see all this, what does it tell us? It tells us that today There is an intense, and this competition will not go away, which is why this is called the decisive decade, and the Chinese are reconciled to this. We must have, if you read the reports which have come out from their major conference, which is the 2 sessions, the clear indication is from the Chinese that they accept the competition from the Americans, and this is not going to go back at all. It will become more intense. So in all this, when the Chinese foreign minister says, Qin Gan, he says that put the bilateral relationship in a once in century change in the world. What he's saying is, in other words, that look, China today is a major geopolitical player and perhaps will be one of the superpowers. Perhaps it will lead the global south by 2030. And India is a power, is a major power, but again it is a potential major power because it is piggybacking on the American power. And what is being a major power? A major power, your foreign policy, everything of a major power basically depends on your national power and political determination. Your national power has 3 verticals, which is your economic power, your technology power, and your military power, and your political determination, which we have seen on the 19th of June 2020 when the Prime Minister said that nobody has come in our territory. The point I am making is, here was the Chinese foreign minister saying that let's put the boundary question at an appropriate position and work for the management of the border at an early date, something which has already been agreed by the 2 sides on the 10th of September 2020 under the joint statement. And this is precisely what Mr. Rahul Gandhi was trying to explain, that because Jay Shankar does not understand the role of artificial intelligence, I would say all diplomats need to know the role of artificial intelligence in diplomacy. So he has misread the entire geopolitics. Your neighbor is not any other major power. No, it is not another pole that he thinks it is. It is a geostrategic player. And this is precisely the threat that Mr. Rahul Gandhi was pointing the attention to. Thank you so much.